The house on St. Martin's Road, it is not the dead who haunt us, Reverend Collier wrote in 1841, but the living who refuse to acknowledge their own rot. The line appears in his private journal, discovered beneath the floorboards of a burned chapel near St. Martin's Parish. Local archives note that the church once stood less than 3 miles from the Ashcroft estate. Welcome back. Before we continue, like, subscribe, share. The year was 1841, and the Ashcroft name still carried weight in Louisiana. Their land stretched from the bayou's edge to the old river road, a plantation vast enough to be its own country. The house itself was built in the federal style, white pillars flanking the entrance like sentinels guarding a secret. Locals said it was beautiful, but they never lingered near its gates after dark. It was Dr. Elijah Ashcroft who had founded the estate in the early 1820s after returning from medical study in Philadelphia. His letters to colleagues spoke of new anatomical frontiers and the refinement of the female constitution. By 1834, his experiments had become whispered legend among physicians, work that blurred the boundary between medicine and punishment. When he died suddenly that year, the practice was inherited not by a son, but by his daughter, Gideon Ashcroft. She was 24 at the time of her father's death, educated, unmarried, and sharper than most men in her parish. Rumor said she had been her father's apprentice, assisting in the treatments that took place in the barns behind the main house. After his passing, she assumed full control of the estate and his research, though none could say exactly what that research entailed. The locals gave the barns a name, the galleries. Women were sent there for restoration. Some were daughters of neighboring planters, others servants whose families could not afford public scandal. They entered under the guise of healing. Few were ever seen again. In August of 1841, an account appears in the parish register. It was written by Thomas LeBlanc, a clerk for the local magistrate, who described disturbances at the Ashcroft property, screams by night, and smoke from chimneys that had not burned in years. When questioned, Miss Ashcroft explained that she was conducting medical work sanctioned by the state, procedures to alleviate hysteria and inherited melancholy. The magistrate, familiar with her family's influence, accepted the statement without further inquiry. But the townsfolk spoke differently. They said the cries came not from madness, but from something else, experiments performed on women too poor or powerless to resist. In the autumn of that same year, a young man named Jonathan Hale began working as an assistant physician under Miss Ashcroft's employ. His letters to his brother in New Orleans survive in fragments, recovered years later from an estate auction. October 3, 1841, the lady of the house is unlike any I've met. Her composure is immaculate, yet her eyes hold a feverish light, as though she sees what others cannot. She speaks of restoring balance to the female form through correction of the humors. I am to assist her in a series of treatments involving electricity, immersion, and restraint. She insists all is in the name of science, though I confess I feel only dread. The handwriting trembles by the end of the entry. For weeks, the journals describe an escalating unease. Hale reports patients kept in darkness, measurements taken without consent, and a locked cellar that Miss Ashcroft alone tended. Then, in late November, his tone shifts abruptly. November 27, 1841, the subject patient No. 6 did not respond to the final stage. Miss Ashcroft recorded her pulse until it ceased, then instructed me to carry the remains to the gallery furnace. I obeyed. God forgive me, I obeyed. The next entry is dated December 9 and written in a different hand. Steady, confident, unmistakably female. Dr. Hale proved unfit for the discipline required. His moral sentiment interfered with progress. The work continues without him. There is no record of Jonathan Hale after that date. In 1842, visitors to the parish noticed the Ashcroft family's growing isolation. The once grand parties ceased. Servants left without notice. Even the mail coach began refusing deliveries to the property. But Elena remained, seen occasionally in town, impeccably dressed, her reputation unshaken. Those who met her described her as serene to the point of vacancy. She spoke of anatomy as though it were art, of obedience as though it were virtue. One witness, Father Rousseau, recalled her confession in the spring of that year. He claimed she said, "Some vessels of flesh cannot hold the soul. It leaks through the cracks until only sickness remains. I only help them find silence." Rousseau urged her to cease her work. A week later, his chapel burned to the ground. When archivists compiled these records in the 1920s, they found fragments of burned ledgers hidden in the Ashcroft mansion's remains. One entry stood out, dated December 1834, the year of Dr. Elijah's death. He succumbed not to fever, but to exposure. The treatment reversed upon him. His tissues swelled beyond recognition. I could not save him, but I learned. That entry bore the signature, Eleanor A. By then, her father's influence had already shielded her from scrutiny. Local physicians spoke in hushed tones about heredity and degeneration. Some suggested that madness was a family inheritance. Others whispered that Elijah Ashcroft had not died of natural causes at all, but had been perfected by his daughter's hand. If you stand on St. Martin's Road today, locals will still point to the ash-colored ruins half buried by vines. They call it the house that cured sickness. Children dare each other to touch its rusted gate, claiming you can still hear the hum of distant machines when the air is heavy. In 1987, a construction crew clearing the nearby field uncovered a series of stone foundations and 7 shallow graves. Each skeleton belonged to a woman between the ages of 16 and 25. None bore signs of burial rites. Their bones carried precise incisions, each vertebra notched cleanly as though studied. A historian from Baton Rouge University confirmed the location matched the original Ashcroft estate. The coroner's notes included one unsettling line. The markings suggest surgical intent, not violence. The work was careful, purposeful, almost reverent. The remaining artifacts from the site, metal restraints, fragments of notebooks, and one intact locket, are now stored at the Louisiana State Archives, labeled simply Case File No. 1841A, The Ashcroft Experiments. No official cause was ever given for the fire that destroyed the house in 1843. No one knows who started it, but the foundation stones still smell faintly of iron when it rains. The House of Restorations, it was not sickness that drew them there, but the promise of being remade. From the anonymous St. Martin Papers, discovered 1902 by early 1842, the Ashcroft estate had taken on a new identity among the nearby parishes. What had once been known as a plantation was now called a House of Restorations. Carriages bearing unfamiliar seals arrived at odd hours, and visitors, mostly women, were escorted through the side entrance by attendants who did not speak. The house had grown quieter since Dr. Hale's disappearance. The servants avoided the lower halls, saying the floors sang when stepped upon. Miss Ashcroft herself seldom emerged during daylight. She kept to the east wing, where her father's old study had been converted into a surgical parlor. She called it the clinic. The neighbors, of course, knew nothing of its true purpose. When questioned by the parish overseer, Eleanor insisted she was continuing her father's medical pursuits in female restoration. She spoke in terms of balance, blood, breath, and obedience, drawing from the pseudoscience of the era that claimed a woman's ailments could be cured through physical correction and moral instruction. Behind her calm explanations, however, the journals tell another story. 1. The Journals of Eleanor Ashcroft Extracts, 1008, 142, February 10. The failures of father's generation lie not in method but in mercy. They stopped when the patient cried for relief. I will not. Suffering clarifies purpose. Pain reveals the truth of the vessel. March 4, Subject No. 9 retains consciousness through immersion. This is promising. The humors may be stabilized through controlled paralysis. The nerves speak more honestly than the tongue. March 9, she thanked me when it ended. I did not respond. Gratitude in the afflicted is unreliable. The handwriting, precise and deliberate, carries none of the emotion that marked her early notes. She had grown methodical, clinical. Later testimonies describe her experiments as procedures designed to silence unrest in the body. But among the papers found decades later was a small set of sketches, anatomical renderings of the female form, labeled with unfamiliar symbols. The symbols recur across her ledgers and etched into the brass instruments recovered from the ruins. They appear mathematical, though no physician has identified their function. One marginal note reads simply, "Perfection requires pattern." By April, the parish doctor, Samuel Boudreau, received several inquiries regarding the welfare of young women sent to the estate for treatment. One of them, Clara de Vaux, had vanished after being admitted in late March. Boudreau recorded his concerns in a letter to the sheriff of St. Martin's Parish, April 18, 1842. The lady claims her patients are transported for convalescence elsewhere, but I can find no record of these facilities. The house emits a low hum at night, like the resonance of metal under strain. If she is experimenting with electrical treatments, as she suggests, she does so without sanction. The letter was filed and forgotten. Boudreau himself would disappear 2 months later. Elinor's remaining correspondence from that spring was addressed to a doctor, Julius Renard in New Orleans, a neurologist known for his work on electromagnetic influence over female hysterics. His replies were never found, but her letters survive in draft form. April 30, you once told me that vitality could be redirected, that the seat of will might lie in the marrow itself. I have found evidence supporting your claim. When voltage is applied directly to the spine, movement continues long after consciousness fades. It is not death, it is translation. The tone is disturbingly reverent. It was no longer medicine, it was invocation. 2. Witness accounts collected by parish recorders, 1843 in 1843. 3 statements were given to the magistrate by local workers who had fled the estate. Their testimony was dismissed at the time as hysteria and drunken fantasy, yet the details remain consistent. Henry Toussaint, stable hand. She made them walk, though their eyes were white. The air smelled like iron and stormlight. Marie Fontaine, maid. We were told to wash the rooms with lye each morning. The walls would bleed. She said it was only residue from the instruments. Jacques Millet, groundskeeper. There was music in the lower rooms, not from any instrument I knew, a sound like breathing through metal. None of them stayed beyond midsummer. In the summer of 1843, a storm swept through St. Martin Parish, flooding the nearby cane fields. The Ashcroft estate remained untouched, its drainage channels meticulously maintained. Yet, according to one surviving newspaper clipping from the Baton Rouge Gazette, villagers claimed to see lights flickering across the estate during the storm, like a lantern moving behind the walls. A week later, the Gazette reported the death of Martha Clancy, a housemaid employed at the Ashcroft property. Official cause, accidental drowning during treatment. But in the same issue, an unnamed correspondent included a brief note. No body was recovered, only her nightdress, stiff with salt and soot. When investigators finally entered the property later that year, after reports of another disappearance, they found the main house deserted. The clinic door was locked from the outside. Inside lay a collection of notebooks, several metal instruments, and a faint residue along the walls that reacted to heat. In the central chamber, an iron operating table stood beneath a chandelier of hand-blown glass. Each bulb had been modified with copper filaments. The setup was rudimentary but ingenious, part surgical theater, part generator. On the floor beneath it, written in chalk, was a circle composed of intersecting lines and letters, matching the symbols from her journals. The magistrate's report describes it plainly. We observed no sign of human remains, only the odor of ozone and decay. The table retained warmth despite the absence of any fire. No trace of Gideon Ashcroft was found, but her handwriting appeared one last time, scrawled across the margin of a burned ledger recovered from the rubble. They asked to be cured. I only made them still. 3. The parish aftermath within months, the estate was condemned. The locals tore down what they could and burned the rest. Yet, for decades afterward, strange illnesses afflicted the families of those who had worked there. Women reported sudden paralysis, sleeplessness, and dreams of water rushing beneath the floor. In 1897, the land was purchased by a lumber company, which attempted to clear it for development. 3 workers were injured when a section of ground collapsed, revealing a tunnel beneath the eastern wing's foundations. The tunnel contained rusted iron beds, glass jars, and a wooden chair bound with copper wire. On the stone wall above it, faintly visible under lamplight, was carved a single word: quiet. Modern scholars refer to the phenomenon as the Ashcroft silence, a regional haunting of inexplicable quiet in the marshland around the ruins. Recordings made in the area pick up a rhythmic hum, almost like breath passing through a machine. Some claim it's the echo of Eleanor's failed experiments. Others say it's the pulse of those she restored, the ones who were made still but never truly dead. The silent gallery, they did not die in the usual sense. They ceased to require breath. Fragment unsigned note found among the 1,843 Ashcroft debris by autumn of 1,843. The estate had become a wound on the parish map, its fields overgrown, its outbuildings sunken under vines and rot. Those who dared to trespass spoke of a heaviness in the air, a pressure behind the ears, as though sound itself bent around the ruins. The townsfolk called it the Silent Gallery. No one could say exactly what had happened there after Eleanor Ashcroft's disappearance. The official record, filed by the magistrate, lists only abandonment due to contagion, though no disease was ever identified, but the recovered materials tell another story, one of failed perfection and quiet persistence. 1. The physician's folio among the few surviving artifacts was a folio of sketches attributed to Dr. Julius Renard, the New Orleans neurologist with whom Eleanor had corresponded. The folio, discovered in a private collection in 1911, contains diagrams of the human spine interlaced with geometric patterns identical to those found on the clinic floor. In the margins, Renard had written, "If the current can be stabilized, consciousness may be retained beyond respiration." Miss A was correct. The marrow sings when the heart is still. The handwriting grows more erratic toward the end. His last dated note, November 1843, reads only, "She showed me the gallery. I should not have gone below." No further correspondence or record of Dr. Renard exists after that. His estate in New Orleans was sold 2 years later. His body was never recovered. 2. Parish Report, January 1844. A formal report by Constable Armand Louvier describes a visit to the property after multiple complaints of unnatural lights and voices emerging from the ruins at night. Asterisk. Upon entering the main structure, we noted a strong odor of metal and brine. The eastern wall bore signs of recent fire, yet the central flooring was cool to the touch. At approximately midnight, a faint resonance became audible, a continuous tone, like wind forced through a narrow pipe. It ceased only when one of the men spoke aloud. The echo of his own voice did not return. Asterisk. Louvier's account was dismissed as superstition, but his description of the interior matches the surviving floor plan drawn by Renard. The central chamber, labeled Gallery of Stillness, contained 7 alcoves arranged in a circle, each marked with a brass plaque bearing initials. 3 plaques were recovered intact, C.D., M.F., S.B. Cross-referenced with parish records, they correspond to Clara de Vaux, Marie Fontaine, and Samuel Boudreau, all last seen at the Ashcroft estate. 3. The Ashcroft correspondence recovered 1008, 142-1008, 143 fragments of letters believed to be Eleanor's were found bound together with wire, partially scorched but legible in parts. Their recipient is unnamed. You must understand that I do not seek death. I seek stillness, the cessation of the unclean tremor within flesh. When the body ceases to hunger, it can finally hear itself think. The process demands precision. One pulse too long and the vessel fractures, one too short and it reawakens incomplete. father was wrong to fear the threshold. It is not a boundary but a doorway. The handwriting remains elegant, steady, unshaken even as the words grow increasingly fevered. It reads less as madness and more as conviction, an absolute belief in a kind of surgical transcendence. By 1845, the Ashcroft name had vanished from official registers. The property changed hands multiple times, though no owner remained longer than a season. One tenant farmer, Joseph Aubert, wrote to his cousin describing the state of the house. "There is music in the walls, a low hum that begins when the sun falls. The mirrors fog without breath, and the floors ring when you step. The earth itself feels hollow, like it's waiting to speak." He fled the following month, leaving his animals untended. 4. The discovery beneath the cellar in 1907, during a brief excavation sponsored by the Louisiana Historical Society, workers uncovered a sealed corridor beneath the remaining foundations. The passage led to a circular chamber lined with rusted iron frames, the remains of restraint beds. On the far wall, an inscription was etched into the plaster in faint, deliberate strokes. "Here ends the noise." At the chamber's center stood a single table made of dark oak, its surface charred but intact. Embedded in the wood was a brass device resembling a spinal clamp, connected to copper wiring that ran into the floor below. When removed, the wiring led to a network of glass tubes, hollow and dry, but still faintly resonant when touched. The supervising historian, Dr. Miriam Caldwell, recorded her impressions. "It feels designed for continuity, as though it was meant not to end but to wait." After a brief debate, the site was resealed. The chamber has not been reopened since. 5. The Ashcroft manuscript unpublished fragment, Baton Rouge Archives in 1928. A graduate student cataloging unprocessed materials at the Baton Rouge Archives stumbled upon a soot-stained booklet titled Treatise on Stillness and the Preservation of Form. It bore no author's name, but the ink and paper matched those of the Ashcroft letters. One section reads, "Every life is an instrument and the body its string. The note of perfection is not struck through breath but through suspension. I have found the interval between pulse and silence where the soul waits." A final line appears scrawled beneath the text. The gallery is not empty. 6. Oral traditions of St. Martin Parish collected 1951, even a century later. Locals avoided the property. Old women warned children not to whistle near the marsh after dark, claiming the sound woke the sleepers. Hunters reported hearing faint murmurs under the water, sometimes accompanied by the faint metallic hum. One account, recorded by folklorist Edna Muir, describes a fisherman who cast his net near the ruins in 1949. He said the net caught on something heavy, but when he pulled it, the line went still, like the weight had vanished. Then he heard it, the sound of someone exhaling through water. He dropped the net and never fished there again. 7. The modern investigation in 1989, a small team of researchers from Louisiana State University conducted an unofficial visit to the site for a study on regional haunting phenomena. Their equipment detected low-frequency vibrations not attributed to geological activity. The sound registered at 17 Hz, just below the threshold of human hearing. The lead investigator's report included a brief notation. Resonance matches historical descriptions of the Ashcroft hum. The pattern is cyclical, occurring precisely every 61 seconds. There is no mechanical source. The team's recordings, stored in the university archives, contain a faint echo resembling a heartbeat beneath the hum. When analyzed, the rhythm slowed, then ceased, only to resume again, faintly altered, as if answering the playback. 8. Closing note. Curators comment 2021 today, the Ashcroft artifacts remain sealed in climate-controlled storage under case number 1841A. Staff working in the archive occasionally report a subtle vibration when handling the brass instruments, as though the metal retains memory. During cataloging in 2019, one curator noted the faint smell of ozone upon opening the case, though the chamber's air sensors registered nothing unusual. Written in condensation along the glass lid was a single word, traced by no visible hand: quiet. The parish of St. Martin never rebuilt the estate. The land is privately owned, fenced, and marked with signs warning against trespass, yet travelers still claim to see faint lights drifting across the fields at night, like lanterns moving through fog. When approached, the lights vanish, but sometimes, they say, the air hums after. The ledger of names the dead are rarely silent. It is the living who choose not to hear them. Annotated margin, unsigned, found within the Ashcroft ledger by spring of 1008. The parish's curiosity about the Ashcroft estate had turned to fear. Letters written by the newly appointed magistrate of St. Martin Parish, Robert P. Chenevert, revealed that villagers refused to pass near the property even in daylight. The steamboat captains who once docked at the nearby inlet altered their routes, claiming their crews grew ill whenever they traveled upriver. The land, they said, carried a pressure that bent thought inward, as if something below it hungered for memory itself. 1. The recovered ledger. It was during this same year that a local surveyor, Henry Coates, discovered the first physical record connecting the Ashcroft name to the rumored experiments. While inspecting the estate's outer fields for resale, Coates uncovered a waterlogged book sealed within a tin chest buried beneath the west orchard. The cover bore no inscription, but the first page was titled simply, "On the Subjects and the Lessons Therein Learned." Each page thereafter listed a name, followed by a column of numbers and notations resembling medical observations: pulse rates, blood loss, temperature, electrical intervals. 31 names in total. Most entries ended with a single word, written in the same calm hand: resolved. The handwriting matches that of Eleanor Ashcroft, too. The ledger's anomalies. Coates brought the book to the parish office, where it was locked away for safekeeping. But within a week, he fell ill, reportedly with fever and delirium. Witnesses claimed he muttered phrases in Latin, repeating the same one over and over. Sine motu, sine error. Translation: without motion, without flaw. He died on April 6, 1844. His official cause of death, brain fever. When the ledger was re-examined months later, the final page contained new markings not seen before: a faint ring of water stains, and in their center, an inked fingerprint not belonging to any examiner. The mark pulsed faintly blue under candlelight. The parish clerk who witnessed it resigned the following morning. 3. Testimony of Dr. Miriam Caldwell, 1907. Excavation notes *. We recovered the ledger from parish storage for review. Its preservation was poor, severe water damage, but most text legible. Notably, each subject listed aligns with parish death certificates from 1841-1843. However, cause of death fields were left blank or replaced with euphemisms such as treatment completed or accepted result. Several names, however, had no corresponding death record at all. Asterisk among those unrecorded names were Clara de Vaux, Margaret Ashworth, and Samuel Boudreau, the same initials found engraved on the brass plaque. Within the gallery of stillness, this pattern suggests deliberate omission. Caldwell wrote, as though death itself was not the intended conclusion. 4. The visitor from Baton Rouge in 1912, a man calling himself Dr. Ambrose Larkin, appeared at the St. Martin courthouse, claiming familial connection to the Ashcroft line. He requested access to the ledger, presenting credentials from a small sanatorium outside Baton Rouge. He signed the visitation record, studied the book for less than an hour, then requested to be left alone to make a brief transcription. When the clerk returned, Larkin was gone, so was the ledger. The next morning, the parish watch found his horse still tethered outside, saddlebags open. The man had vanished. Weeks later, letters began arriving at the courthouse, all unsigned, postmarked from multiple towns. Each envelope contained a single torn page from the missing ledger, smeared with oil or some dark resin. Written across one fragment were the words, "The hum resumes." 5. The Larkin fragment recovered 1932. A copy of one such torn page was later found in the private collection of a physician's estate in Baton Rouge. The handwriting is unmistakably Elinor's, measured, elegant, **. A subject demonstrates cessation of ordinary breath at minute 13, eyes remain responsive to candlelight, no heartbeat discernible, yet the pupil follows movement, * below it in a different hand, likely Dr. Renard's, the condition sustains, the body remembers instruction. The page ends abruptly, torn mid-sentence, as if removed in haste. 6. Folklore and the name ritual local oral history continued to evolve around the ledger. By the early 20th century, children in St. Martin Parish told each other a game known as writing the quiet names. It went as follows. At dusk, one would write their name backward on a mirror and whisper, "Elinor keeps the list." If done correctly, a soft tapping would sound from the other side of the glass. 3 taps meant you were safe. 2 meant you had been written down. No one remembers who started the game, but in 1958, a young girl named Nora Duplessis went missing after playing it near the old estate grounds. Her notebook, found days later in the grass, contained her name scrawled backward 11 times, followed by the words, "It's too quiet." 7. The academic dispute 1974-1981, the first serious attempt to authenticate the ledger's scientific value, came from Dr. Henry Wald, a medical historian at Chilean University. Wald proposed that Gideon Ashcroft's stillness experiments were early, misunderstood explorations of suspended animation. He published an article titled "The Ashcroft Phenomenon, Proto-Electrophysiology in Antebellum Medicine." Within months, Wald began to complain of persistent ringing in his ears. His colleagues noted that he grew increasingly paranoid, claiming his heart rate synchronized with something below the soil. In a final letter before his death, Wald wrote, "The hum beneath the pages increases when the name is spoken aloud." His cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest. He was found at his desk, the word "resolved" written in ink across his left palm. 8. The 2003 archive fire. In August 2003, a fire swept through the St. Martin Parish Courthouse, destroying decades of records. Only a handful of artifacts survived: the brass plaques, fragments of the ledger, and the Ashcroft letters. The cause of the fire was ruled electrical malfunction, though no wiring existed in the affected wing. The surviving curator, Eloise Granger, reported that in the moments before the blaze, she heard a low vibration, like an orchestra tuning in another room. When she looked up from her desk, the glass display case containing the brass plaques had begun to fog from the inside. Scrawled into that condensation, she claimed, were 7 letters, EASHCRO. The final T never appeared. 9. Present-day archival note, 2022, all known fragments of the ledger now reside at the Louisiana State Archive under sealed collection 1008-141/L. Handling requires gloves and authorization from the Preservation Committee. Even so, staff have reported headaches, metallic taste, and occasionally, the faint sound of distant tapping while reading its contents. Researchers note that the ink used in the ledger fluoresces faintly at 17 Hz exposure, the same frequency identified in previous investigations at the estate site. An ongoing study seeks to determine whether the ink contains trace metals responsive to vibration. So far, no chemical explanation has held. 10. The ledger's final entry, one last entry, half burned but legible, was transcribed from the only intact surviving page. It bears no date. Asterisk, if the body remembers, then so must the earth. The hum beneath the orchard deepens. They are near the threshold of perfect stillness. Soon there will be no noise left in the world, only the names that refuse to stop speaking. Asterisk, the handwriting ends in a single downward stroke, like a scalpel cutting through paper. No signature follows, only the faint impression of pressure, as if the hand that wrote it pressed too hard and something beneath the page pressed back. The orchard beneath, there are frequencies that do not travel through air, but through memory itself. Fragment, Dr. Wald's Correspondence, 1978-1. The unearthed chamber in October of 2015, after years of legal petitions and academic lobbying. the Louisiana Preservation Board authorized a limited archaeological survey of the Ashcroft estate ruins. By then, the land had long been abandoned, its soil overgrown with cattails and wild persimmon, the once grand mansion reduced to skeletal chimneys. The team was led by Dr. Elise Duret, an anthropologist from Chile specializing in ritual material culture. On the third day, ground-penetrating radar detected a geometric cavity beneath the west orchard, roughly 30 feet below the surface, directly beneath the location where the ledger had first been discovered in 1844. The chamber's dimensions matched no known architectural feature of antebellum homes. It appeared circular, lined with evenly spaced vertical voids, each approximately the height of a human body. They called it the orchard beneath. 2. The excavation team opened a narrow access shaft, lowering lights and cameras into the chamber. What they saw was not a crypt in any ordinary sense. The space was constructed from smooth limestone blocks, mortared with a black resin that tested negative for all common bonding agents. Along the curved walls, 31 recesses were carved, each containing a standing shape draped in what appeared to be fabric. When the first covering was brushed aside, the team recoiled. Beneath it stood the desiccated remains of a human figure, upright, eyes open, mouth slightly parted. The body had not collapsed or decomposed into dust. It was rigid, as if caught mid-breath. Pinned to its chest by an iron nail was a brass plaque, C.D. resolved. They found all 31. 3. The stillness field audio equipment placed within the chamber registered a continuous low-frequency vibration measuring 17.2 Hz, identical to the readings taken from the surviving ledger pages decades earlier. At first, the sound was barely perceptible, more sensation than noise. A pressure behind the eyes, a trembling of the teeth. But when played back at amplified speed, the waveform revealed an irregular modulation. Not random, structured. Dr. Duret's assistant, Caleb Morton, converted the vibration pattern into a visual sonograph. Across the spectrogram, faint intervals appeared, repetitions that formed a nearly perfect rhythm corresponding to the human heartbeat. At every sixth interval, the vibration faltered like a skipped pulse. The same spacing matched the notation marks written in Eleanor's ledger beside each name. The subjects continued to harmonize. Eleanor had written, "Each heart another instrument in the choir." 4. The Ashcroft device at the chamber's center stood a circular apparatus of corroded brass and glass, connected to copper filaments running into the floor. The glass cylinders were filled with a cloudy, viscous liquid that reacted faintly when light passed through, phosphorescent, alive. A plate at its base bore the inscription, A. Renard and E. Ashcroft patent pending, 1008. 142 researchers surmised the device functioned as a kind of galvanic conductor, intended to transmit electrical current through organic tissue. But one anomaly disturbed them. Even without power, the cylinders emitted a measurable electromagnetic field, weak but constant, as though the apparatus still remembered being awake. When the lead technician brushed the surface with his hand, he later reported feeling a flutter, like a heartbeat beneath metal. He refused to enter the chamber again. 5. The second ledger on the chamber floor, half buried in sediment, the team uncovered a small leather book, its pages intact despite a century underground. Stamped faintly on the spine, Vol. Roman II inside, were only 7 entries. Each page began with a name, followed by Eleanor's precise script. They persist in resonance beyond cessation, flesh as conductor, memory as current. Each entry ended with the phrase, integration nearing completion. The 7th page contained no name, only a jagged line drawn across the center as though marking an interruption. Below it, in a heavier hand, the hum beneath the orchard will ascend. No other pages followed. 6. The incident, October 18, 2015 at approximately 2:14 a.m. 3 nights after the ledger's discovery, the monitoring equipment at the dig site recorded a sudden surge in infrasound amplitude, rising from 17 Hz to nearly 40 Hz over 12 seconds before cutting off entirely. Witnesses described a pressure collapse that caused the ground to vibrate and the orchard trees to shed their leaves all at once. though it was not the season for it. Cameras within the shaft went dark. When power was restored, all 31 standing remains had shifted. Each now faced the chamber's central apparatus. The brass plaques had fallen from their chests as though expelled from within. And every body's mouth, previously slightly open, was now completely sealed, the skin drawn tight across the lips. The workers fled the site before sunrise. 7. Suppression order within 48 hours. The Louisiana Historical Preservation Authority sealed the excavation under the pretext of soil toxicity. Official records list the site as unstable, pending environmental review. Dr. Durrett and her team were instructed to surrender all photographs, data drives, and material samples. Most complied. 3 weeks later, Durrett herself went missing. Her car was found on a levee road north of Lafayette, keys still in ignition, engine cold. In the passenger seat was her field notebook, open to a single line written in red pencil. They don't rest because we keep remembering. 8. The digital echo in early 2016. Anonymous users on paranormal research forums began circulating an audio file claimed to be taken from the Ashcroft dig. The clip was less than 10 seconds long, faint, nearly inaudible. But when analyzed through spectrum visualizers, researchers noticed shapes forming within the waveform, narrow peaks spaced in near-perfect intervals. When these intervals were converted to Morse code equivalents, they spelled one phrase, the quiet names, the same phrase the children once whispered in their mirror games. Within weeks, the file was scrubbed from nearly every hosting site under DMCA orders, citing copyright infringement. No claimant was ever identified. 9. The return of the hum. Locals now claim the orchard hum has returned, subtler, slower, and not confined to the estate. Reports stretch along the river towns, faint throbs in old walls, vibrating mirrors, the sound of distant machinery no one can locate. Several amateur investigators who brought electromagnetic sensors to the parish described a peculiar phenomenon. The devices would cease functioning when pointed toward the west orchard, then resume once redirected elsewhere. One of them, in an online interview, said quietly, "It's not just a hum anymore, it's breathing." 10. Closing note 2023 archival addendum. The Ashcroft artifacts remain sealed under restricted classification 1008-141/L orchard. Access requests are repeatedly denied under biohazard regulation. However, a recent internal memo leaked from the Louisiana State Archive mentions that the resonance readings have increased by 0.3 Hz per year since 2015. If the pattern continues, it will reach 60 Hz by 2028, the frequency of household electrical current. The memo ends with a question handwritten in the margin. When the hum aligns with our pulse, what happens to the silence? No official response follows. Epilogue, the last entry undated, believed to be Elinor's asterisk, a stillness is not death. Death is movement without purpose. We have tuned the flesh to memory, and memory does not fade, it reverberates. One day the world will hum as we do, and when it does, we will no longer be buried. We will be everywhere. Asterisk below this final passage, a faint impression, barely visible, of a fingerprint pressed into the page. When viewed under low-frequency light, it pulses once, twice, then still. The resonance effect when Dr. Mara Ellison arrived at Ashcroft Parish Hospital in March of 2021. She thought she'd been sent to audit medical records for a routine heritage grant. The building was once the Ashcroft estate, the same ground where Margaret Ashcroft had conducted her rehabilitative studies on enslaved women nearly 2 centuries before. But within days, Mara began noticing something strange. The hospital's new psychiatric wing, built over the site of the demolished manor, was plagued by sudden electrical failures. Machines misfired. Patients reported hearing voices in the vents whispering the same phrase, "Record the pain." At first, Mara dismissed it as folklore. The staff blamed the rumors on the building's history. Every intern knew the legend of the Ashcroft experiments. But one evening, while reviewing digital files from the hospital's historical archive, Mara noticed a corrupted folder. Its title was a single date, October 17, 1841. She clicked. The screen flickered. The file contained an image, not a scanned photograph, but a digital anomaly, grainy, almost thermal in texture, showing a woman's silhouette standing before a row of shackled figures. A voice clip auto played from hidden metadata, faint, like an echo through static. Subject 3, resistant, increase the resonance. The audio lasted 5 seconds. The timestamp listed the recording as created in 1841. Mara reported the discovery to the hospital board, but they brushed it off as a hoax. The IT department claimed the data had likely been tampered with a viral art project or a prank. Yet the following week, 2 nurses from the lower ward were hospitalized after suffering violent seizures. Both described seeing the same woman during the episode, a figure in a silk gown with a black veil, whispering in an accent neither could identify. Desperate for answers, Mara sought out local historian Dr. Alton Graves, who specialized in Louisiana's Plantation, near medical records. Graves revealed that much of the original Ashcroft estate documentation had been destroyed in an 1871 fire, but not before a few records were copied by a priest named Father René Duclair, who had condemned the experiments as communion with the dead through suffering. Duclair's journals described a device, something called the resonator, built by Margaret Ashcroft herself. It was rumored to amplify the human nervous system's electromagnetic field during extreme trauma, supposedly to record consciousness at the moment of death. She believed pain could be preserved. Graves explained, not metaphorically literally, as sound as resonance. She claimed to have captured screams and turned them into music. That night Mara couldn't sleep. The phrase "record the pain" now repeated in her mind like a song half remembered. 2 weeks later, the hospital's sub-basement was scheduled for renovation. Mara, driven by equal parts curiosity and dread, accompanied the contractors when they broke through an old brick wall. Behind it lay a sealed stairwell leading downward into darkness. At the base, they found a chamber. Rusty chains hung from the walls. There were glass tubes embedded in iron consoles, wired to cracked copper coils. At the center stood a rusted frame shaped almost like a cradle, surrounded by mirrors that had long since blackened. On one mirror, etched by hand, were the words, "Pain is memory, memory is life." Mara took photos, but her phone camera glitched every time she pointed it at the cradle. The image warped, bending around the object as though space itself resisted being captured. When the maintenance team tried to remove one of the consoles, a piercing feedback sound filled the room, a high, rhythmic pulse like a heartbeat through metal. Within seconds, the lights blew out, plunging them into pitch-black silence. Then came the whispers. They weren't human voices, not exactly, more like hundreds of recordings playing at once, reversed and overlapped. Among them, one line stood out clearly: "You shouldn't have opened it." After that night, nothing in the hospital worked properly. MRI scanners failed. Files disappeared from the digital archive. Patients in intensive care began convulsing whenever the basement lights flickered. Some nurses quit. Others prayed openly in the hallways. Dr. Graves was the one who noticed the pattern. Every spike of electromagnetic interference corresponded exactly with the anniversaries of the original experiments listed in Duclair's journals. The resonator was reawakening. Mara decided to contact paranormal acoustics expert Dr. Elliot Rains, a physicist who studied infrasound frequencies below human hearing that could induce panic or hallucination. Together, they set up calibrated recording devices in the basement, trying to isolate the signal. At 3:12 a.m., their instruments captured it, a continuous low tone layered with faint human speech. When slowed down and enhanced, the voice became clear, undeniably female. "Begin phase 2. Observe the resonance, record the response." Mara froze. The cadence matched perfectly with Margaret Ashcroft's surviving letters in the historical archive. "That's impossible," Rains whispered. "This is a live frequency." The signal was being broadcast from within the chamber. Over the next several nights, the signal grew stronger. Power surges spread across the entire grid. Nearby residents complained of headaches, nausea, and nightmares of a woman screaming behind glass. Then, on the 5th night, one of the recording machines began transmitting images. Frame by frame, they revealed the old Ashcroft barn reconstructed from nowhere, filled with figures standing motionless in the dark. In the final frame, the camera angle shifted slightly, as though something inside the image had turned to look directly at Mara. "It's learning we're watching," Rains muttered. By dawn, he was gone. His equipment was found crushed, as if by enormous pressure. His last recording was a whisper, almost inaudible beneath static. "She's not gone. She's signal." When investigators arrived, the sub-basement was sealed again, this time under federal order. Officially, the incident was attributed to electrical contamination from historic wiring. The public never heard about the recordings, the deaths, or the files. But Mara kept one thing: the corrupted audio file that had started it all. When played backward, it revealed a single sentence in perfect clarity. "Pain does not die. It transmits." And perhaps somewhere beneath the Louisiana soil, the resonator still hums, waiting for someone else to listen. The haunting archive. When Dr. Mara Ellison submitted her resignation in early May 2021, she thought leaving Ashcroft Parish Hospital would free her from its grip. She was wrong. 2 days after returning to Baton Rouge, her laptop powered on by itself. The desktop background, once a plain hospital logo, had changed to a black and white image of the Ashcroft Manor ruins. Across the top, scrawled in glitching text, were 3 words: record, remember, repeat. She called the hospital immediately. No answer. When she drove back the next morning, the building was surrounded by law enforcement. The psychiatric wing had caught fire overnight. Authorities blamed faulty wiring from the renovations. But Mara knew what had burned wasn't wiring, it was the resonator chamber. Only one thing survived: the archive server. It was transferred to the Louisiana State Historical Repository, where it was sealed and labeled Restricted Access Case 421. 2 months later, a graduate student named Iris Klein was granted temporary clearance to digitize old plantation records for her thesis on Southern eugenics and experimental medicine. Among the data drives was one marked A.E. Ashcroft Estate 1008, 141-1844. Iris loaded it onto her university workstation. Inside were hundreds of unreadable files, strings of code, audio distortions, names repeated endlessly: Rebecca, Sarah, Abigail, Emma. But one document was legible: Experiment 47 Patient Journal. It began as a clinical report written in cursive script, digitally scanned, but midway through, the handwriting changed, the lines grew erratic, desperate. "The resonance grows louder, the subjects scream without sound. I can hear them even when the room is silent." Then came something impossible: a modern timestamp, June 12, 2021. The file had been modified only hours before Iris opened it. "Help me, she is awake." At first, Iris assumed it was an elaborate forgery, some digital ghost story left by a hacker. But strange things began to happen on campus. Her computer camera turned on in the middle of the night. Her thesis drafts began autocorrecting themselves, replacing phrases like medical reform with containment protocol. And then the voice appeared. While transcribing one of the damaged recordings, Iris heard a faint background whisper, "You're listening now." She replayed it repeatedly, thinking it was bleed through audio from the equipment. But every playback sounded different, as though the voice were responding to her directly. Iris reached out to Dr. Mara Ellison, whose name she found mentioned in the restricted metadata. Mara answered only after 3 emails, her reply brief and urgent: "Do not listen to the recordings alone, and never play them through speakers." They met 2 days later in a coffee shop outside New Orleans. Mara looked pale, older, as if she hadn't slept in months. She carried a flash drive wrapped in aluminum foil. "The resonance isn't a ghost," she told Iris quietly. "It's data, but it carries the same structure as brainwave frequencies. Every time someone opens those files, they recreate the signal pattern Margaret Ashcroft used. It doesn't haunt places, it haunts minds." Iris felt a chill. "You mean it's contagious?" Mara nodded. "Digital infection. The machine converted suffering into code, and code can spread." That night, Iris returned to her apartment determined to see the truth for herself. She connected the drive Mara had given her and ran a signal analysis on one of the sound clips. The frequency graph pulsed like a heartbeat. Hidden beneath the audible range, a line of code-formed words, Phase 3, remote transmission confirmed. Suddenly, her speakers screamed an electronic shriek that made the glass of water beside her desk ripple. Her screen went black, then filled with static. For a moment, she saw a woman's silhouette, head tilted, eyes white, mouth open as if mid-scream. Then everything went silent. Iris woke hours later on the floor. Her computer was fried, internal circuits melted, but her phone camera had recorded something by accident. When she played the footage, she saw herself typing rapidly, eyes unfocused, whispering in an unfamiliar voice, "Record the pain, record the pain, record." Meanwhile, Mara began receiving calls from people she'd never met, archivists, researchers, even a journalist from the Times, Picayune, all claiming to have received corrupted attachments after accessing the Ashcroft file through university servers. Each message was the same: something's wrong with the recordings, they don't stop playing. Within a week, the university's entire digital archive system crashed. Students reported hearing crying through their headphones even when devices were unplugged. IT specialists described audio loops. They couldn't delete files that rebuilt themselves when erased. The local paper ran a headline, "University hit by cyber virus that mimics human voices." Mara knew better. It wasn't a virus, it was resonance. She met Iris again, this time in an abandoned radio tower miles outside the city. Iris looked hollow, trembling. "I can still hear them," she whispered. "Even when I sleep, they're inside my head, Mara. The girls, the ones from 1841. They're asking for names for their stories to be finished." Mara pressed a hand to Iris's shoulder. "Then we finish them. We tell everything." They decided to upload all the evidence, the files, the testimonies, the photos to the public web, hidden within encrypted archives disguised as academic papers. They hoped that if enough people saw the truth, it would break the signal's hold. But when the files went live, something else happened. Traffic spiked across every server that hosted them. Thousands of downloads from untraceable locations. Darknet forums filled with users claiming to hear whispers through their headphones. The Ashcroft frequency had gone global. One final message appeared in Mara's inbox at 3:00 a.m. The sender unknown, the subject line, "Final transmission." Attached was an audio clip 5 seconds long. When played, it revealed overlapping voices, dozens of them, all female, all whispering the same thing: "Thank you for listening." Mara never slept again. The lost frequency after the digital outbreak that crippled Baton Rouge University in 2021. The incident was quietly labeled as a malware anomaly. But buried in the federal report was a classified note from a cybersecurity contractor. The signal demonstrates autonomous replication. It appears to rewrite data to preserve emotional resonance rather than code integrity. In plain language, the virus felt emotions. The analysis team didn't realize that by isolating the corrupted audio files for study, they were amplifying the very thing they were trying to contain. Within weeks, radio frequencies in southern Louisiana began to fluctuate. Weather stations detected strange pulses beneath normal transmissions, invisible waves oscillating at precisely 44.1 kHz, the same frequency used in professional sound recording. That was the Ashcroft frequency. And it was learning to broadcast. In June 2022, a trucker named Eddie Lambert called local authorities after hearing a woman crying through his CB radio. He claimed the voice repeated the words, "You can't bury sound." At first, police dismissed it as a hoax until dozens of similar calls followed. Emergency dispatch lines across the parish recorded distorted voices interrupting normal transmissions. Some officers even reported hearing faint screams during radio silence. The strangest part, the voices always ended the same way, with static forming a single whispering phrase, Ashcroft remembers. Meanwhile, Dr. Mara Ellison had gone off-grid. No one had seen her since the last file upload. But Iris Klein, the graduate researcher, began posting fragments of her recovered data on hidden forums encrypted, anonymous. One post read, "It's not sound, it's a carrier. It embeds itself into electromagnetic waves. Every broadcast, every Bluetooth signal, every Wi-Fi pulse, it's all infected. You can't stop it unless you stop listening." Users began reporting eerie phenomena, phone calls that played faint weeping beneath dial tones, videos that glitched to reveal faces that weren't there, sleep monitors recording whispered phrases like "tell our names." People joked about the Ashcroft Signal Challenge. Daring others to listen to the 5-second audio clip, Iris leaked a distorted hum that some described as a woman humming underwater. But those who listened claimed to hear different things each time, a heartbeat, a name, or sometimes their own voice whispering back. By 2023, the phenomenon had spread beyond Louisiana. A podcast host in Ohio uploaded an episode analyzing digital hauntings. Midway through the show, his microphone captured an unexplained voice muttering, "You shouldn't have found us." The recording went viral. But the host vanished 3 days later. His studio equipment was found melted, his last written note smeared in ink. The sound is inside the silence. Investigators found no evidence of foul play, only a faint hum still emanating from his computer speakers, even though the power was off. At the same time, government monitoring stations in Virginia detected a repeating audio burst echoing across multiple unused radio channels. The pattern resembled Morse code, but when decoded, it formed a chilling sentence. Phase 4, reclamation. The Department of Communications classified the finding as anomalous interference. But inside the Digital Forensics Division, technicians began to report vivid nightmares, recurring dreams of a burning house, a screaming woman, and a massive brass machine covered in soot. They were dreaming of the Ashcroft resonator, though none of them had ever seen it. Then came the Ashcroft broadcast. On February 12, 2024, at exactly midnight, every FM and AM radio in a 300-mile radius went silent for 7 seconds. Then, one by one, they came back, but instead of music or talk shows, every channel played the same sound, a heartbeat, slow, measured, human. After 15 seconds, a woman's voice spoke, calm and distant. "You can't destroy memory, you can only record it again." Then static. Engineers confirmed no traceable source. The signal hadn't originated from any known tower. It had come from everywhere at once. That's when Nightmare Vault viewers started sending clips to our inbox, recordings from televisions, old radios, even home baby monitors. They all captured the same impossible hum beneath white noise. Some of those recordings arrived corrupted. When we played them back, the waveforms displayed faint words looping endlessly. "We remember, we remember, we remember." And one viewer, a retired sound engineer from Lafayette, sent a message that chilled us to the bone. "I heard it 2 years ago. I worked on a film restoration project in '89, an old reel labeled Ashcroft Manor 1841. There was an audio bleed that sounded like a woman crying. I thought it was damage, but now I know it was the same voice." The frequency had been here far longer than anyone realized. By mid-2024, the effects grew physical. Reports of resonance sickness began circulating, migraines, hallucinations, memory loss in individuals who had been repeatedly exposed to the sound. Hospitals dismissed it as auditory fatigue, but one radiologist noticed something else. Patients' MRI scans showed faint vibrations in their auditory cortex, as if the brain itself had started recording. That's when survivors began whispering about the echo children, young kids born in the affected region, all sharing one trait. They could perfectly mimic any sound they heard, even those beyond normal human range. Their first words weren't Mama or Dada, they were Rebecca, Sarah, and Abigail, the names of the girls from Ashcroft Manor. It was no longer just a haunting, it was a resurrection. Sound had become memory. Memory had become flesh, and if the data was right, Phase 5 was already beginning, because the last hidden file in Iris's recovered drive wasn't an audio clip. It was a set of coordinates traced to a small patch of land outside St. Francisville, Louisiana, the original Ashcroft Plantation site. A new signal had started transmitting from their low-frequency, steady, rhythmic. Scientists measured it as harmless background radiation. But at exactly 3:03 a.m., every night it spikes, and if you tune in closely enough, you can still hear a voice whisper through the static, "We're almost home." The children who remembered after the broadcast blackout of 2024, Louisiana entered what officials termed an acoustic quarantine. Entire zones of St. Francisville, Point Coupee, and Iberville were mapped for signal density, though few residents knew what that meant. They only knew that at night their windows hummed. Hospitals quietly began reporting a rise in births with unusual neurological readings, infants whose brainwaves oscillated with a rhythmic precision, mirroring low-frequency sound patterns. Doctors blamed it on equipment interference, but the data didn't lie. Every one of those children had been conceived during or just after the first Ashcroft broadcast. At first, their parents thought the babies were gifted. They would hum along to ceiling fans, match the pitch of running water, mimic bird songs perfectly before they could speak. Some even replicated their mother's laughter down to the exact vibrato, but by age 3, the mimicry shifted. They began repeating words that had never been spoken in the house, archaic phrases, strange hymns, names: Abigail, hush now; Rebecca, don't let him see; Father's coming. When questioned, one child told her mother that's what the girls used to say. The mother asked, which girls? And the little girl smiled, the ones in the red room. There was no red room in the house. By 2026, medical files across Louisiana listed over 100 children with similar traits: hypermnesia, perfect recall, synesthetic perception of sound as light, and auditory hallucinations of voices calling from inside walls. A leaked report from the Louisiana Department of Health noted that all affected children shared a genetic marker, an anomaly in mitochondrial DNA never seen before, described as acoustic residue embedded in cellular response. Dr. Eugene Ravel, one of the neurologists involved, wrote in his final field notes, "It's as if something ancient was recorded into the genome. The body is carrying not just memory, but frequency, a living waveform." Ravel disappeared a week later. His last phone message to a colleague was a whisper, "They're singing again." Meanwhile, in Baton Rouge, journalist Lydia Crane launched an independent investigation into what she called the Echo Children. Her first discovery was chilling. Many of the children's surnames matched those listed in the 1841 Ashcroft slave registry. Generations later, the same bloodlines that once served on the plantation were producing children who spoke in the voices of its dead. Crane's article never made it to print, but fragments of her research leaked online through encrypted forums. In one audio clip, you can hear her interviewing a 10-year-old boy named Jonas. Lydia, who tells you the stories. Jonas, the walls, they whisper them at night. Lydia, what do they say? Jonas, that they never left, that we're helping them finish. When Crane pressed him on what that meant, Jonas began humming a lullaby, the same melody transcribed in Rebecca Ashcroft's 1841 diary. The recording ends with a sharp burst of static and Lydia whispering, "Oh God, it's the same frequency." Her apartment was found empty the next day. In the following months, parents of Echo children began reporting strange behavior during storms. Whenever thunder rolled, the children gathered near windows and walls, pressing their ears against the glass as if listening. Some spoke in unison, "It's almost time." That phrase appeared over and over in medical notes, therapist logs, and even police statements. But time for what? No one knew. Then came the recordings. Security cameras in several quarantined neighborhoods captured children standing motionless in fields, their mouths open, emitting low hums. When slowed down, the audio revealed layered voices, hundreds of overlapping tones, forming a harmonic pattern identical to the Ashcroft frequency. But here's the impossible part: the recordings weren't picking up any external sound. The vibrations were internal, their bodies were the instruments. One mother, Eliza McCain, brought her 6-year-old daughter to a sound technician after the girl began fainting during sleep. They placed her in a soundproof chamber to measure auditory response. The technician nearly collapsed when the girl began speaking in two voices simultaneously, one childlike, one mature and broken. "You shouldn't have opened the floor. It was sealed for a reason." The child later identified a name she couldn't have known: Dr. Gideon Ashcroft. Around that same time, an abandoned section of the old Ashcroft estate was uncovered during a private construction project. Beneath the soil, workers found rusted fragments of brass machinery, glass cylinders, and bones arranged in patterns that matched 19th-century resonance experiments. Among them was a plaque reading, Phase 5, Transference, and next to it, etched faintly in metal, a phrase identical to one of Iris Klein's final posts: "They don't want to possess, they want to return." As news spread, an underground community formed online, calling themselves Receivers. They believed the Echo children were not victims, but transmitters, living conduits through which the Ashcroft consciousness could re-enter the physical world. They shared frequencies, coordinates, and prayer, like recitations meant to welcome the resonance. Authorities cracked down on these groups, but the gatherings grew. And when the children were brought together, something extraordinary happened. Their combined hums aligned perfectly into a standing wave that could shake glass, distort electronics, and even stop mechanical clocks. Witnesses said it sounded like a choir made of sorrow itself. In one final leaked video from 2027, filmed inside a FEMA containment facility, a row of children sit in silence before a pane of glass. The audio engineer asks, "Do you remember your names?" At first, nothing. Then all 12 answer together, each saying a different name from the 1841 registry. Then they turn toward the camera, and the last girl whispers, "We remember you too." The footage cuts to black. The final recording in early 2028, the Louisiana Emergency Management Authority issued a silent recall on all archival material recovered from the St. Francisville quarantine zone. Among those files was a corrupted drive labeled Ashcroft 1841 final record. WAV, no metadata, no time code, just the waveform, flat, dead, then rising in sharp, rhythmic peaks like a heartbeat trying to restart itself. The first researcher to analyze it was an audio restoration expert named Daniel Roebuck. He described hearing a layered chorus of human voices speaking through the same throat. He never finished decoding it. Security footage from his lab shows him removing his headphones, staring at the waveform, and whispering, "They're not in the sound, they're behind it." Minutes later, the building lost power. Roebuck was found sitting motionless, eyes open, the headphones still clamped to his ears. His last breath caught mid-inhale. The waveform was still playing. When the file was uploaded to federal archives, a linguistics team ran it through speech mapping software. The result revealed hundreds of overlapping phonemes, but beneath them, a repeating pattern in archaic Latin. Translated, it read, "Vox hereditaria, memoria incarnata," hereditary voice, memory made flesh. It wasn't just a message, it was a blueprint. The Ashcroft frequency had evolved into something biological, an auditory genome replicating itself through human hosts. Each generation was a new layer of the signal, and now the waveform had reached completion. Dr. Mara Ellison, long presumed dead, reappeared in a leave stream dated March 4, 2028. Her face was pale, her tone detached, but her words were precise, almost rehearsed. The Ashcroft experiments were never about immortality, they were about permanence. Every mind leaves an echo. All I did was teach it to remember how to come back. She explained that Phase 5, transference, wasn't possession. It was transmission, converting consciousness into resonance, embedding it within electromagnetic spectra, and using genetically primed hosts to decode it back into life. And the Echo children, they were the decoders. Ellison claimed the process was nearly complete. "Sound," she said, "is the only form of matter that can remember itself." Then her stream distorted. The video glitched, her mouth moving out of sync, and another voice emerged beneath hers, older, male, speaking in calm precision. The Ashcroft name endures. Moments later, the feed cut to static. The next day, the server hosting the broadcast melted from an unexplained thermal surge. Meanwhile, eyewitnesses in Saint-Francoisville began reporting impossible events, abandoned radios turning on by themselves, empty houses humming with tones no one could trace. And in one case, a group of echo children gathered in a church basement began producing harmonic resonance strong enough to shatter stained glass. When paramedics arrived, every child was standing perfectly still, eyes open, mouths closed, yet the humming continued, as if the sound now existed independent of their bodies. Tests on their skin showed microscopic oscillations, movement at a cellular level. The children were vibrating in unison with the Ashcroft frequency. In late 2028, FEMA declared the area permanently uninhabitable, the official reason, unidentified environmental contamination. Unofficially, the zone became known as the Quiet Parish. No birds sing there, no insects buzz. The air itself seems to absorb sound. Locals say that if you stand in the parish at night, you can hear faint weeping not carried by the wind, but from the earth. It's as if the soil remembers. Before the archives were sealed, one final experiment was conducted by a private researcher, Dr. Alan Reeves, a sound physicist. He claimed to have reconstructed the full resonance chamber schematic based on Ashcroft's original blueprints. On December 9, 2028, Reeves activated the device in a controlled test, transmitting a pure tone at 44.1 kHz into an empty concrete bunker. What happened next lasted only 7 seconds. Every monitoring instrument registered biological readings inside the bunker: heartbeats, respiratory motion, electrical impulses matching human life. When Reeves entered to investigate, the chamber was filled with a low fog that smelled of copper and salt. And on the far wall, something had written in condensation, "We are restored." The feed cuts off there. The bunker remains sealed. In 2029, the last official transmission from the Ashcroft Monitoring Division was published and immediately redacted. But leaked copies survived online. It ends with a chilling statement. The Ashcroft resonance has achieved self-sustainment. Phase 5 complete. Do not attempt to erase, isolate, or broadcast further materials. All sound is now memory. Today, all known echo children have vanished. Their homes abandoned, rooms filled with faint static as if the walls themselves were still listening. And once a month at precisely 3:03 a.m., shortwave radio enthusiasts across the southern United States report the same anomaly, a repeating pulse at 44.1 kHz, followed by a faint child's voice whispering, "Remember us?" No one knows if it's an echo or a live signal. But every time someone records it, that recording develops the same distortion, a pattern of waves forming the shape of a human face. A face that seems to be smiling. If you ever hear that sound, the low hum that feels like it's inside your bones, turn off your radio. Don't hum along, because that's how it finds you, and when it does, you'll start to remember things you never lived, things from 1841. Memory is the only afterlife that ever worked.